During Svenja's introduction, you saw me looking quite nervously to the screen here. And the screen is saying, where did we come from? Where are we going? Anthropology and contemporary art. But Svenja, in her introduction, she not only used the term anthropology, we heard her saying a few sentences later, the ethnological museum, and then she switched again to the term the ethnographical museum. So just like our colleague Katrin David is always saying, we have to be incredibly precise. We have to be incredibly precise. What are we talking again? Which beast are we talking about? Because where do we come from? Where are we going? I think that's absolutely one of the big question marks when we raise the question about the past and the future of the ethnological museum. And I'm always referring to a text by a former colleague of mine, Anke Bangma, who used to be a curator at the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam. And the Tropen Museum, as you know, got closed by the Dutch government. Fabulous collection, as Claudia knows. And Anke Bangma wrote in 2013 in a special issue of Textische Kunst about globalism, she wrote the following lines. She says, we have to distinguish between an ethnological museum and an art museum and their respective discursive fields. We must first underline the fact that ethnological museums initially operated as art museums, yet as an alternative to art museums. And Anke Bangma writes, I want to point out that the sort of timelessness, the lack of time of the ethnological museum is today becoming totally uncomfortable. So where do we come from? The ethnological museum as an alternative to the art museum. Where do we going? We have to insert back the time of the other and our time into the ethnological museum. That's something I would like to give to you and to the panel to think about. But first, Claudia, please help us. What's the difference between, is there a difference between an ethnological and an ethnographical museum? Because in Deutsch you say ethnographisches, and in Französisch, in French, en français, on dit parfois un musée ethnologique. So what's the difference between an ethnographical museum and an ethnological museum? And maybe I should first go to Kader. Kader, what's the difference between anthropology and ethnography? Why don't you start? What's the difference? You have to take the microphone.
How does it work?
It works.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if she will answer Claudia better than me, but as far as I'm concerned, the difference between ethnological museum and ethnographic museum is the experience of the object. On one hand, you have anthropologists who went there and they observed civilization and they have written what they were observing. This is ethnography. And then when they came back in their university and started to develop theory from what they have observed, this is ethnology. They raised science from observation. And I think this aspect is very important.
Okay, that's good to begin with. Claudia, do you agree with Kader? You have to take the microphone.
Sorry. Not totally agree. I would like to compare the notion of ethnographical museum and ethnological museum to the term of iconology and iconographic studies. So, and to me, the term of iconology has a more political aspect. And I think also going back to the notion of the ethnographical museum, the ethnological museum, I would say, the ethnographical museum is so related to the question where we come from. With the ethnographical museum, we are still in the 19th century. So it's still collecting data, and the iconological museum, I would say, is one step further.
And what do we do then with anthropology?
Well, anthropology is, I mean, you also can talk of the anthropology of design or the anthropology of art. So it's the science about the human being, and I would not closely link it only to ethnological.
Thank you. Simon, can you still follow? It's quite confusing, isn't it? So
yes, it's
just
confusing.
make things clear.
Yeah, because I remember in Cameroon when I was a kid and we were discussing that, the take of my grandfather is like, we have to go back to the Greek and resound with what has been said here. The difference being anthropos is the human, ethnos is the being, one. Graphos is the sign, and logos is the discourse. So of course, whatever is logos is political, whatever is graphos is the field work.
So can we take a vote? Do we speak tonight about the ethnological museum or the ethnographical museum? What do you prefer?
Well, talking of the future of those type of museums, I would prefer iconological.
Iconological, ethnological.
Sorry,
okay,
sorry.
so
No, it means that she would prefer, no, that she sees no future.
do you
for
agree?
Those.
Do you agree? Ethnological? Shall we use that tonight? Ethnological? Fine.
I mean, I think so, because I think there is a very narrow space between ethnological and anthropological. And what Claudia says, I would say, one of the most important stake here is the political aspect of it. So if we want to talk about the future, we can't avoid this aspect.
So?
Repatriation, I mean, all what we will speak about this later, but
So
ethnological.
Okay, good. Fine, that was our introduction. Now it's clear to you. We speak today about where do we come from, where do we go to, ethnological museums and contemporary art. In 1908, Guillaume Apollinaire wrote a fabulous text, and it was called in French, Sur les musées, about museums. And Guillaume Apollinaire invited the Louvre to make place for ethnographical masterpieces. That was 1908, inviting the Louvre to make place for ethnographical masterpieces. Today, we see almost the reverse. We see many museums, many ethnological museums. Think about the Franz Jakob Museum in Zurich, think about the Weltkulturmuseum in Frankfurt, das Weltmuseum in Wien, but also the Musée de l'Afrique in Tervuren. They want to make place for interventions, comments by masters of contemporary art. Question is then, what role can the Ethnological Museum play in the future? We of course hear voices since the 50s and the 60s which are defying the past and the present and also the future of the Ethnological Museum. One of the strongest voices, of course, is Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon, who said, we witness in these museums, the ethnological museums, we witness the destruction of cultural values, of ways of life, language, dress techniques, they're all devalorized. The cultural mummification leads to a mummification of individual thinking. Edouard Glissant is even going further. And he says, 20 years later, after Frantz Fanon, he says, j'haïs les musées ethnographiques. I hate ethnographic. He uses the term ethnographic. I hate ethnographic museums. And he says, I hate them because I'm not irritated by the way they look at us. Don't forget that Edouard Glissant is belonging to the other side. But what irritates me and frustrates me the most, says Glissant, is there is no way of looking back. And then 20 years after Edouard Glissant, Achille Mbembe, in his latest book about, and I always forget this title, Critique de la raison nègre, Achille Mbembe is saying, listen, let's forget this battle. Let's think about what we can learn from it, but we have to think about a collective subject. And he's proposing something else. He says, let's give up the old battles and let's think about plural archives, working with people coming from many different disciplines and doing something new, because if we want to talk about decolonialization today, we have to wonder if we are really decolonized ourselves, the West. And we have to wonder from which perspective we speak. And we cannot solve that right away. We have to do something else. We have to invent a collective subject. And he pleads for these plural archives. And that's where I think is the Ethnological Museum going to. And that's maybe why we invite so many artists into our ethnological museums, coming to work, coming to look at these objects. And maybe that's also the reason why so many contemporary artists are taking on these archives in their own praxis. And I think one of the best examples is sitting here in the middle, and that's Kader Attia. Kader, you said to me in an interview, which is going to be published in Antwerp in a couple of months, you said, you know, the way we work, contemporary artists, is making the classical anthropologist, the classical ethnologist, more than jealous, because they would like to work like we today, like contemporary artists. What do you mean by that?
I don't remember it. But what I remember is that we have probably the most interesting interview I've ever had, I told you before, and I really think, because it was, anyway, try to buy the book that will be published in 2 months. There's something very important that I would like to say, is, I mean, every artist has its own universe. I like to say that each artist is a library. As far as I'm concerned, I much before I included in my own art reference to ethnography, I was already interested by that. I was living in Congo-Brazzaville between 92 and 96. I've seen what any ethnologist or anthropologist would have dreamed to see, the mask dancing at the Mbushi Ole in the north of Congo, in the area of the Bateke people. I have always been into this sort of carefulness about being aware that trying to develop a reflection within an art project from an art and a culture and a cosmogony that which you do not belong, you have to know, you have to accumulate a certain amount of knowledge. And when we quite often talks about decolonization, for instance, referring to the ethnographic museum or ethnological museum, the fact that most of the objects of non-Western traditional cultures are stored in the Western world. I have to say that the most important, which I have learned as an artist, is to decolonize the knowledge. Because the whole difficulty as an artist, when you that you discovered when you get involved in a project that needs investigation of archives, sometimes using of the archives, sometimes using the object themselves, touching them. I mean, is the fact that you actually get stuck in front an incredible weakness of the Western mind, which is the relation between the significant and the signified, on which modernity has been based. In non-Western...
You mean Western modernity?
Yeah, the Western modernity. In non-Western cultures, the notion of boundaries, borders, the notion of significant and signified do not work the same. In some cultures, the meanings of healness, being healed, has not the same meaning in the Western modern world. That's why, for instance, in Africa, there are a lot of cultures like the Dan, the Pende from Congo, the Dan from Ivory Coast, the Ibibio from Nigeria, who have made so many healness masks. The healness, the disease was celebrated. So the thing is that I have to say, if we talk about and I'm here at some point to speak about this issue of how does it work to be doing art today, or at least to try to do art today, with the heaviness of this past and of this legacy. I have to say that it's kind of a huge abyss, I don't know this English word, in which you completely lose, you get lost because of this way of thinking that your mind have been shaped and educated.
And you think that contemporary artists can deal much better and in a much more, correct way with these issues and with this matter than classically trained anthropologists, ethnologists?
No, I think there are two different works, but I have to say that it's not only contemporary art, it's also modern art and art from the past. An artist has this incredible ability to create relation between things that has nothing to do together. We call this ellipse, between this microphone and a gun or a glass of wine. This is called surrealism. I think when you get in front voodoo art from ihre, for instance, voodoo paintings, I have to say that I really feel artistically closer to such art rather than when I'm reading text by anthropologists, which I found too much based on a succession of truth.
That's what you now express. I'm sorry, Kader, is quite an exotic view.
No. Why?
The way you talk about voodoo and what you're in.
Exotic would be to be ethnologic with you and say you have Prada shoes, and then you have this pant, and then you have this jacket. That would be exotic. When I'm going to Haiti, when I'm listening André Malraux, for instance, looking at the Montagne Saint-Soleil, what is interesting is that he's cutting the fact that in this in this art, there is a liberty because this culture did not have the pompier, for instance. So they don't have the complex to do a very perfect reproduction of reality. The exotism, I don't know what is exotism, but I think it's very important first to be aware of this huge complexity that are the non-Western traditional cultures, because they are not based on the same way we do think.
Okay. Simon, do you agree with Kader?
Je ne sais pas, il faut que j'y repense.
No, we have to speak English. I know this is much easier to explain in French, but let's try it in English.
Okay, try in English. There's something you said, three things actually. The commonality of a knowledge, let's put things in common. That's what Achille would like us to do.
Achille and Bembe.
The second thing is that more and more ethnographic, whatever, we know what we're talking about, whatever word we use, are inviting contemporary artists to intervene in their field. And the third thing is that Kader is doing it. Now, to go back, how can you create a commonality when you're coming to different perspective? We have a problem with translation. Kader was aborting it, is when a word, going back to semiology or phenomenology, when a word doesn't mean the same thing when it is not spoken the same way. When somebody is saying something coming from the exogenous side, which means somebody from outside, I don't think that Kader can be from outside. Claudia could be from outside. But the outside is not necessarily something that excludes. It just is a position that everyone should be aware of. But what is interesting, when you go back to the roots, the Greek roots of those words, is to see how a part of it had been objectified. And I think that when a museum director of one of those museums is inviting non-Western artists to intervene there, it's again objectification. Because when Kader goes there, he takes it. when the artist is invited, is serving again the logos of the one who is inviting him. So it becomes again a pretext, it becomes a mask that people are wearing in order to make believe that they're changing. But you cannot change a system that was based on the otherness. Le Louvre was made as a museum of civilization in the sense. And it's funny because some centuries after that, they meant civilization, they meant what they called primitive, how the switch in the world. So you had the Louvre with the masterpieces, and then you have the Museum of the Others. And we know that ethnos is the being, anthropos is the human, but then all of a sudden, anthropology or ethnology was reserved to the non-so-humans, to the others. And if you go to those museums, you don't find some stuff from Britain, you don't find some stuff, no, it's coming from afar, Pacific, Africa, etc., etc. And of course, I was giving a lecture in Addis once, and I was telling the kids about the way the story is written. Benjamin, nothing to say here. It was that they were teaching a book of Ethiopian civilization that was written by a great German researcher who came to do her field work in the very remote place, and she did not speak Amharic. So she came there with a translator who did not speak German. So she would ask her question in English, which was not her mother tongue, to a translator whose mother tongue was not English, who would translate it into Amharic and then retranslate the answer to her. And that was the book that would tell people in the 20s about their history. That's the system we're living in. And there's something, Achille was saying, there's something I share about him, is that I find the post-colonialism studies, the post-colonial I find it bullshit. I find all the post actually bullshit, beside the post office that is still functioning. But he was saying, instead of talking about post-colonial, let's think the post-colony, which means let's think an after. Let's stop about the colony, let's assume that we after the colony. Because if you say we're post-colonial, it means that everything is linked to the colony. So if we want to invent a future, we have to decide that we're in a post-colony time, which means that the only people who can save those poor dying museums that I would close if I could are the people who were there, objectified. Only them can infuse some life in those museums. Only them can read. There's something that Senghor said before, the two you mentioned.
Leopold Senghor.
Yes, he said, we have people who are philosophers at home, our grandfathers, we have people who are artists, etc., etc., but we were told that there was no philosophy, there was no art, there was nothing. And he was saying in that quote that what saved their lives then was to go back there, because they were away from home, and to have this conversation with those objects. Of course, when we talk about where we're coming from and when we go, where we go, what is interesting in conversation is the misunderstanding. But this misunderstanding talks to somebody. Of course, when Césaire, Senghor, and all these others would be talking to a mask at the Musée du Trocadéro, they didn't have the knowledge to have the level of conversation the people who made it had. But they had at least a feeling of something. And I mean, to have the feeling of something in a fluidity, instead of being a scientist, the way those people invented those things, the problem of the science is that science thinks that it's always right. But what we know, coming back for where we're coming and going where we're coming, is that science is always mistaken. It's only by accident then we move.
So you think it's a good thing that contemporary artists like Kader are invited to work with these archives while putting on, if I understood you well, while putting on a mask?
No, I don't think it's a good thing if people like Kader would be invited. What I think is a good thing is when people like Kader take it.
Okay, that's a big difference. Claudia, would you agree that the future of ethnological museums is trying to give up this distance in time and physical distance, like Johannes Fabian is saying in his famous book, which is now becoming almost a Bible for contemporary Western artists working with archives, and the book is called Time and the Other, How Anthropology Makes Its Objects. Would you agree that only contemporary artists can give up this distancing in time, this distancing in terms of physical distance?
No, I'm sorry. I think I would not agree. Just to take it from my everyday practice as a curator, I think talking of museums and talking of the future of certain museums types, we are talking first of all about power systems, because all these classifications, whether it's a picture gallery or whether it's a museum of arts and crafts or whether it's an ethnographical museum, this is all based on hierarchies established in the 19th century. And we in our museum in Hamburg, we just, in the last years, we also we went through this process of reinventing the museums of arts and crafts, because this is, maybe it's almost finished, I don't know, but I don't know whether you notice it, but in the last, let's say, 5 years, almost every big museum of arts and crafts tried to reinvent itself. And now
like ethnological museums.
Yes, and now now we try to reinvent ethnological museum. And I think one important point that you said, Kader, is that it's right that all these anthropological objects are in Western archives, and I think I very much like the quotation at the beginning where you said that I hate all this ethnological discourse or this ethnological museums. We should get rid of all these classifications. And I would say the problem with ethnological museums is the history. We try to be political correct. That's why we looking for artists. They should help us, because all the science...
So that's only a question of being politically correct to invite contemporary artists?
No, but I think many...
It's to look more sexy.
No.
Je peux répondre.
No, but I think many, just one thing, when I started to work for Afrika Remix, at that time I worked in a well-known museum of contemporary art, and I said to my colleagues, oh well, I'm moving to Düsseldorf and I start to work for a project of African art. And then my contemporary art curator colleague said, now you are starting to work with anthropological art. And I said, no, it's contemporary African art. Is there any contemporary African art? And I said, yes, of course. And that's what you were saying, Simon, about the idea of the otherness. So we are...
I know, it's very confusing, right? Okay, but before Kader and then Simon, I just want to go back for a bit to Claudia. So what do we expect, what should we expect, what can we expect when we invite contemporary artists to work with the Ethnological Museum, with ethnological archives? What's important? What can we learn from them? What can they give to the object which anthropologists, which ethnologists cannot give?
I think of course, you are more free. You are not a prisoner of a scientific system. You studied at university, I would say. Many curators are also...
Did you ever learn something from these contemporary artists who are looking at archives? Some of them, when I look how contemporary artists work with so-called archives of modernism, I think it's pure nostalgia. It's so sentimental.
I think it depends also, excuse me, Claudia, I just want to add something. Then, as I told you before, each artist is a library. I have to say something which is precision. I've never been invited by a museum. I was doing this on my own, on the side. I lived in Congo Brazzaville. I was moving. I mean, Simon knows that we cross sometimes in African airport by hazard. And when I started to be interested by, seriously interested by ethnological museum, it was because I developed for many years the concept of the repair, Reparaturen. And until now, it's an enigma that I'm still working and trying to understand. It's very complex. So I have observed that broken objects in non-Western traditional culture were repaired in a very expressive way. The injuries of the object carries the sign, the signature of the reparateur, of the person who repaired it. Completely opposite of what we call modernity, in which the injuries of a broken object, of an injured body, has to disappear to say, okay, now this is repaired. And I have to say that I can't speak about the other artists. Everyone has its own agenda. But as far as I'm concerned, I get slowly into the storages of the museum looking for repaired objects. And this, I have to say, that was a very nice experience with anthropologists, because most of them told me that they were not aware about this aspect of the object.
Okay, that I get, but quickly back to you. What's then the difference between your notion of repair and, let's say, the new notion of preservation, which is now called by researchers like Jorge Otero monumentarity? What's the difference between your notion and repair and fantastic conservators who do conservation work? And what's the difference between your notion of repair and, let's say, the historical critical reconstruction of architects like David Chipperfield? He also shows the scarves. Why are you better than them?
It reminds me of interview this. So it's fantastic to talk about this again. Preservation is the death of an object. When in a traditional culture, a broken object is repaired, and then the calabash, for instance, repaired, has an incredible design with strings that shows that these injuries have been repaired by someone, the object gets a new life. That's the difference. In the Western mind, modern mind, when we do repair something, we have the fantasy to go back to the original state, which claims to make the injuries over, disappearing completely. In non-Western traditional cultures, not only to sign an expression with very smart process of nuts, but sometimes also to include Western modern elements in the repair. I mean, you remember this fabric I showed you, which was made with raffia from Congo and chacocot, and the holes of the repair were actually French fabric from Vichy, perfectly embroidered on it. There is one thing that I would say, I would quote John Pfeffer about your question on preservation. John Pfeffer says, anthropologists, ethnologists, people from the Western world collect objects. They do collect the object, and they think they are collecting the object. But actually, it's not the object that we are collecting. The object are collecting us. Because we will die, and these objects that we collect are for the future, talking about the future.
But there is a difference then between the objects Kader is talking about and the objects you put together in Afrika Remix, correct? Did you have to make always a difference, Simon, when you did Afrika Remix, to say this has nothing to do with these objects which we used to see?
No, there's a thing. First of all, I was not used to see those objects. I grew up with a museum of outsider artists, as they would say in the States, but in Lausanne, you know? People who were supposed to be crazy, l'art brut, and that's why I grew up.
So art by outsiders.
Yes, but then when we're talking about, I need to quote Malraux, who only didn't talk nonsense. There's something he said when he was in Dakar for the 66 festival, He made an opening speech talking to the local artists. He said, if you want to reproduce the mask, it would be as if we wanted to reproduce the cathedrals. And he said the cathedral and the spirit of the cathedral is dead. And the spirit of the mask is dead. But you entertain a particular relationship with those masks that may allow you to give them another life. In the sense of what Kader was saying, not to put them in formal, not to conserve them, but to give them a new life. To conserve, that's why I love the term conservateur in French. A conservateur in French is a curator. And I love to play with those words. I say, well, how can you be a conservateur of contemporary art? Conservateur is just somebody who's trying to maintain something. And now the question, if we have to address those museums, my question is, how could you reinvent something that is dead? It's like trying to find an intelligent refrigerator that does not exist. And there's something that we have to bear in mind. I have no problem with those spaces, only one, that is political. And we have to address the politics that made them, because those spaces are first and foremost installed as spaces of power of the winner. We go back to Benjamin. We collect those people, we collect those objects as we have been collecting those people. And we show, and there was a competition, who is the bigger, who is the stronger, all among the colonial power to see who will have the biggest. And of course, you fellow Belgians, they were lucky because their king was given a big chunk of land that was his personal property. So he has tervuren, etc., etc. So if we cannot rebuild or reinvent anything because the system is what it is. They were invented and created like that. So it's how do we replace them? That's the very question. If we're talking about the future, and we're saying, where are we coming from? And we're using those museums as a base of debate, it would mean that I am coming from that place. I doubt it. I made that place, or they made it with my things. But it's about discussing politics. What is the political terms now?
And the political term, if I understood you well, or a very important political term, is this whole idea, how do we replace them? Because they are now gone, we have a diaspora of all these objects in Tervuren or in France or wherever. How do we replace them?
Just shortly. Quickly. What we could do first is to create a museum for them and then to see how we replace them. We should create some museum. When I say we don't have that in Africa or in all places. I'm just advising you. You should create a big museum of anthropological museum.
Where?
Anywhere. I mean, you select this Europe. Let's do it in Hungary. I think they're very welcoming people. And then you invent something else.
So you want to create a completely different type of museum here in the West?
Yes, if we're talking about anthropology and ethnology, we have to start from the beginning. We have to go back to the meaning of the word and not to the power system.
Claudia?
Yeah, I completely would agree. We should, as I already said, we should try to overcome our old classification systems. And we should take the challenge to think about a new type of museums. And I just want to bring another point into the discussion, because until now we are always talking about the objects coming from other cultures, the notion of otherness. For instance, in our museum we have a big collection of so-called folk art. It's a fantastic collection, but we are also not showing it, we are hiding it. And I think talking about mask, talking about the original context, we also should see that we make a big difference between high art and low art. This also...
Arts and crafts.
Yes, and many artists, I don't know what you think.
So we have to create a completely new type of museum, by which we can change many things, right? But what do we do then in that museum, Kader? Because I mean, okay, first you, Claudia, what do we do then in that museum? Because one of the things of these objects is that these objects, they existed in almost a purely kinesthetical way. They were supposed to be worn, they were supposed to move, and they had this, what we call, we don't use this here, but it's a very important term, they had this kind of magic about them, this kind of ritualization. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I would like to invite contemporary artists, but I would also think that curators or scientists from every culture all over the world should come together, because we also have holy objects, Christian objects.
So we have to create, like Achille Mbembe is proposing, we have to create a collective subject.
Yes.
And instead of looking for this type of archive and that type of archive, we have to look for a plurality of archives where we combine things from here with things from the West. Is that correct?
Yeah. Plurality of archives, and also we should think about new ways of presentation. That's, for instance, what, to come once again back to the museums of arts and crafts, we have a bit the same discussion. This is an object from this context, this is an everyday object, so how do we present it, what is the context? So, and I think we can learn a lot also from Abi Warburg, because he said every object, if you take this bottle, so it's a design, somebody designed it, but it's also the material, the question of the material, it's the question of branding. So every object, be it a mask or be it an everyday object from whatever culture, is taken out of a context, bringing it to a museum, and now it's our task to recontextualize it and think about new ways of presentation.
In your work, Kader, display and presentation is extremely important. I mean, when I think of the different versions of repair here in Berlin or in London and in other spaces for you, display and thinking about display systems is important. Why is that?
I don't know. I mean,
can you take the microphone?
It's not only in my
Can you
work.
take the microphone?
It's not only in my work. I have to say that I really appreciate when a curator or an artist is understanding or trying to challenge the space. I think this is very important. And I have to say that what Claudia just said about the presentation, of course we can, I think we can say many bad things about ethnologic museums. The presentation from Quai Branly to Tervuren to Dahlem sometimes, etc. I mean, I've seen everywhere. I can't get that you get in front a room in front, let's say, 24 Dogon masks, when you know that the Dogon mask for the Sigi, they dance every 60 years. And then you arrive, you have 24 masks, and this is one small, tiny room in Quai Branly. And the presentation is beautiful. I'm not criticizing what the job of the curator. I'm just trying to answer your question of before, Chris, when you said, so what should be the next step? I don't know if you remember, we have this discussion, and we talk about how the museum should be horizontal. And in this horizontality, I would say that probably, it's just my opinion, maybe it is what it is. Probably we have completely misunderstood the way to think, show, represent, and share these objects until now, because of the fact that these objects have arrived in Europe in very, very, very unfair conditions. They were brought by missionaries, most of them. So most of the museum of ethnology of the world, I would love to do a research and ask to the whole museum the invoices of this object that were supposedly bought to this ethnic group. This raised another issue, which is called repatriation, very complex, because obviously you can't send everything back like this, and which, as far as I'm concerned, really tackled the problematic of the border of the space. Why, for instance, you have to pay when you go to a museum of ethnology? Why, if I am a Gabon student from the FANG and I'm doing my PhD on the mask, I need to get a visa? Why, and I will finish with this, when in auction a contemporary artist is sold, he gets 2 or 3% of the piece which was sold, not even, probably which was sold to the company or the person who sold it in auction 20 years before, and why tribal art auction do not give back at least 2 or 3% of the auction to the ethnic group which would belong this Fang mask, this Teke mask, this Pende mask, whatever. And this is a real issue. I don't know if you remember we talked about this, but there is a Belgian lawyer with whom I'm working on that, and it's a real issue that for him it doesn't make sense that there is something we call art, and within the global art market has not this right. We talk about rights.
No, the naming of things, you mentioned that, Kader, is very important because even semantically, if you call something art, you're giving a price on that. If you call it something else, it's something else. And I think that, Claudia, if I can give you an advice and to all your colleagues dealing with the thing, I think you should go back to Foucault and to read again the notion of heterotopy, heterochrony, and heterology, because those places are mixing all those things. It's like different times in one space, different discourses in the same space, and different places within the same space. But then since people don't have any consciousness of those multiple layered spaces, times, and discourses, there's only one that appears. But then if it was a symphony where every place within the same space would have a space, every discourse, every speech, every logos would have its space, and every time would be encompassed. Maybe this is what Achille would like to call the common.
Didn't we try that? You remember the Berlin Biennial, which was in the Dahle Museum? You know the Probebühnen, there are so many Bühnes here in Berlin. You know the Probebühne of the Humboldt Forum in the Dahle Museum. We try it, and every time we feel like, it's rather weak. It's like a sponge.
No.
So what do we do wrong?
No.
No?
What you did wrong, or what we did wrong, I would say what you did wrong, is that there's one thing to put, how do you call that, un pansement? A band-aid
yes.
On something. It's another thing to take the time to think, to take the time to diagnose the problem, because if you put a band-aid here when the guy is suffering from the heart, I'm not sure that it might be very light.
Claudia.
So thank you for recommending me rereading Foucault. I mean, that's very nice to reread all these theories, but let's go back to practice. If we're talking about museums, a museum is for visitors. It's a kind of democratic cultural institution. And I mean, I think you curated many exhibitions, Of course, the curator always wants to be the super intellectual being telling something.
We'll go back to the museum being a democratic space later.
Yes, but when we it's for the visitor, and that's also a problem we're discussing every day. So the new German word is, it's not didactic, but it's called Vermittlung. I don't know the good translation into English. So we are nowadays talking about Vermittlung. This is a big issue in the contemporary museum's everyday work. So how can we tell the visitor?
So how?
Yeah,
I mean, you saw the Probebühnes, you saw some of them, you saw the Berlin Biennale. Is that a way to warm up people to undertake this kind of Vermittlung? Is that okay, I hate that word. Is that effective?
Well, I'm not really sure. But
can you do it better?
Maybe, yes.
Maybe. That's not very convincing. Maybe.
Maybe it's not good enough. So
maybe.
I need a yes or no.
But well, let's, I think yes, because
okay.
I just, we are not talking now about my project, but it's the fast fashion project. We try to transfer a complex subject to the visitor, and we use several like films, like photos and infographics, text, and also social media and the new media, and I think you should take a bit of everything And you should also give the visitor the chance to participate and to interact. So, but it's very tricky. I mean,
No,
there is not one recipe.
Claudia, isn't it just politically correctness?
So you have to.
This is what you call the democracy?
So you have to use a plurality of forms
Yes.
and methods. There
Yes.
is not one form, there is not one method, there is not one display system. We have to use many different things at the same time. Now, a question to all of you. Why are contemporary artists so interested in archives? Is that another form of weakness, or why are they so interested in archives? Why do they use these meta structures?
He says it's a question for all of us. Huh?
Okay, Kader, why?
You are the artist. You first.
Why are we so interested in archives?
Okay, since I'm not an artist, I'll start and you go ahead.
Please,
Anytime
enjoy.
I go to Venice every 2 years, I need to go and see some archives. I go to the Academia Museum, I go to see some churches, I go to see some painting, I go to see the original things, because we're talking about time. Where are we coming from? Where are we going? Anytime I'm in a place with hyper concentration of contemporary art, I need to go back to remember what art is when I'm a bit lost. And these places are like temples. When I see things that are crafted and that are not charged with the same ideology than now, at least I know why they were made for. I have a kind of an idea as a
So
visitor.
you need to withdraw, go back.
No, I need to feed myself.
To feed yourself. Okay. Kader, why are artists, contemporary artists, so interested to work with archives?
I mean, Chris, I can't speak about all the contemporary artists who are interested by archives.
Talk about you
But,
and your
I
friends.
mean, I was telling you that as far as I'm concerned, I've always been fascinated by history, and it's not only because of this issue. Again, I started to investigate the First World War and how the broken faces soldiers remind me so much some broken mask. And then I remember that from then I started really very much to get to deepen my interest for the archive. But I mean, probably when you walk and you try to just follow your intellectual project, you use constantly archives, but they are not visible. I mean, Foucault, I have read all Foucault. Probably Foucault is the philosopher that I really read a lot, and Deleuze et Guattari. And I mean, this is a way to, especially if you read today Foucault, Deleuze et Guattari, this is total archives, because we can also criticize a lot what they did not see.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So I think it's inevitable. We said before that we're going to use a French word. It's inevitable. The archives is
unavoidable.
We cannot do without archives. Is that correct as contemporary artists? Claudia?
Well,
I mean, I don't want to speak about all contemporary artists, Chris. Following my own experience, please, Claudia, excuse me, I just want to add an important point. Why each time we think about ethnological museum, we refer to Africa? I mean, when I'm in the area of Switzerland, in the Valais, I'm fascinated by these Middle Age wooden virgin sculptures. Why that's why I think that it's not only about the archive, Chris, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but as a document, but much more, I would say, as an object. This notion of object, these things that you get into your hands, and that you feel is charged. It could be something mystic, holy, but it also could be just a book, or that I'm not saying you read it, just as an object. This is probably an interesting question, and I'm sure we spoke once about this, in the face of the world we're going to be confronted to, which will be the disappearance of the object, the digitalization of the complete universe. And that's why I would answer to your question saying that nowadays, artists are fascinated by archives as object because we have this human global fear, subconscious fear, of the world disappearing in the digitalization. This is probably my answer.
And do I hear also a little bit of Freud, totem and taboo, that we do need these kind of fetishes these objects are?
You know, when Freud wrote Totem und Tabu, he never really went to Africa or Indonesia to confront his concept. All Totem Taboo is based on studies and readings that he did from other anthropologists. And I'm very suspicious by this indirect knowledge, because there are a lot of intermediaries. I would say that Georges Devereux, who invented ethnopsychiatry, was probably for me much more as a reference about this direct relation with the fetish.
Do you have a direct relation with the object?
Yes.
You keep referring to Deleuze, Guattari, Foucault. Do you have really a direct relation with the object?
Definitely.
What is a direct relation with an object?
He said, yes, Your Honor.
What is a direct...
My client is innocent.
Stop you, because I might get into a fight. What is the direct relation with an object? What is that? The direct relation with an object. What is that?
Thank you for the question. It's a fantastic question. I think emotion, definitely emotion, and this enigma that is emotion.
And maybe also what you keep saying, moving with an object, movement, performing the object?
Yes.
Bringing back some of the magic in the object? How do you do that?
Bring it back the magic in the object, not really, but trying to be part of it. I think that between a fetish from Congo and a Stradivarius violin, they have one thing they do share in common, is that they are charged of something. They are charged of an energy of someone who has been, and so many people who have been touching and playing them. And if you ask a question to a musician who plays violoncellist, he will tell you that when he gives up the training during a month, his instrument doesn't sound the same.
Okay. Claudia.
I think you said something very important about emotion. And I think that's what, coming back again to the museum, since I'm working in the museum, that's also the task and the challenge, and maybe a question of presentation, that we should try to create atmospheric rooms or places or spaces in order to make some hidden power or whatever the context visible, and that you can feel it. And I think that then we come to theater. So this is a kind of, to invent a new kind of scenography. And I think also, coming back to the question of archives, I think also, like you said, contemporary artists are very important to create a dialogue to archives, but also the curators. I mean, all museums are archives, and it's our daily work, so we have another direct contact, because I can go to my storage and say, oh, today I touch all whatever is in the storage. And I think that's the big challenge, and I'm really looking forward also to the Humboldt Forum, because I think it's a great idea. And as far as I know, because Dresden has one of the biggest and most important ethnographical collections in Europe, nobody knows. And as far as I know, they also want to try to bring everything into a new...
Is that why Hartwig Fischer of the Dresden Museum is now going to the British Museum?
I don't know why. Could be, yes.
Politics. Simon, you wanted to react to Claudia.
Yes, because where we're going, there was a stupid film, I didn't see it. I think I'm going back to the future. I think that to go back to those things, there's a term that any craftsman, because what I like about the craft is that you have to learn it, you have to be trained. There's something that I would use, a word that I would use is experience. So it's a great shortcut of an experience to be face to face with an object that have been doing those things, to be face to face with a book that have been all these things. So there's a kind of a transmission, and it's up to us what we do with it. But all those, let's call it archives in general, are charged, but not necessarily charged with the magic. We're always looking to the magic in different places that simply charged with that magic that we call experience, that they were all performed. Kader was the music, but the mask, etc., etc. All those things were alive. And since they were alive, there's still some life in it. And as long as the museum, the ethno-museum, will try to kill that life within a white crystal box, the life could. But I think that there's an experience that is always a one-to-one experience between the person and the object.
Last chapter of this conversation, then we give the mic to the floor. In 2013, there was an international conference in the Pitt Rivers Museum. And the international conference was everywhere in the blogs and on tweets, because one of the major statements was, who has the right to possess the material culture of others, and not only to possess it, but to present it? My question to you is, in view of this all, we want to do things better. We want to create a much more pluriform museum. We want to create a museum as a kind of platform and trying to touch upon different things in different ways. Would it not be much easier to give all that stuff back? That is, what about restitution? Would it not be much easier to give all the stuff back? Kader.
They always send me to the front.
I knew you, the artist, so.
Is this a difficult question?
It's a good question also, because I think, as I told you before, if we talk about the future is political. And I can't agree more the fact that we have to discuss it, since we did this project called Dispossession, which focus on this incredibly huge collection that the Vatican has of ethnographic items, between 80,000 objects and 100,000, without asking how these objects came, and then it's clear.
Okay, but so we have to give them back?
So, I mean, it's not that easy, Chris. Excuse me if I'm a little bit long, but I'm going to try to make it very short. If you just think that, I was like 6 months ago in a conference in Amsterdam, and there was someone talking about Hinduist object from Gandhar in Afghanistan, and then raising the question of restitution. If you guys restitute this object that belonged to the Amsterdam Museum to Afghanistan now, but these objects will be destroyed by the Taliban. And that's the complexity of the notion of restitution. I took the extreme because we all know what I'm referring to as well. So
that's your answer. Simon.
No, that would be interesting if Europeans would want to restitute, because they would need to do some homework. In order to restitute something, you need to know to whom. And there are places in Africa that were bordered, cut, reinvented, and there are borders that are meaningless for some places where an object could as well belong to this country or to this other country. Now we have those borders. So it would be interesting, because there would be already a vast program for, and I think it would be good for postgraduate, postdoc, etc., to try to retrieve the trace of those objects first, and then we can talk about where to send them and in which conditions.
Claudia, restitution.
Yeah, I think that's a very important issue, not only also to, in other terms, you know that in all museums, most all kind of museums, they know installed a place for provenience research. It's very, very important. Well, I would agree with Simon, maybe it's a bit difficult to know for all the objects, ethnographical objects, where to give them back to. Maybe it's a more better idea to also try and establish more museums around the world.
Also, I think, just shortly, I think that politically, if ever, already all those people who are seated on a war treasury we're starting to speak the word. We're starting to voice the fact that we would like to restitute, to put the word on the table. Because if you have a conversation with the British Museum, they feel like you want to assassinate them. If you do that with certain museum here in Berlin,
But we don't want these objects to be ruined, in Afghanistan, or we don't want them even to be ruined in Mali.
No, but what I'm saying,
and in Burkina Faso.
What I'm saying
right?
is that it would be time for all those institutions to start to address the issue properly and deeply, because then it would maybe help them to understand the complexity of the issue, and by raising the issue and addressing it seriously, we might have the impression that they really mean to do something about it. What to do?
Claudia.
Yeah, maybe it would be a first step, because there are always questions about restitutions, about big, Grabungsfunde, but now talking about all these otherness objects. I liked very much what you said before, that you would love, or one task, or why you like to deal with these archives, is to find out the traces. Where did the objects come from? You were talking about bills, or where have they been bought from? And I think this could be perhaps a first step to do research. That's what we also do in our museum, or in other museums that we have objects of the NS time. We start first with research.
Where do they come from?
Yes,
Yeah.
where do they come from? And this could be a first step, and then also make an exhibition out of it.
Kader.
I would say there is one exception in the restitution of the object. Is first when a whole nation is asking for the object. I'm talking about Native American, because there are several auctions now, like last year in Paris at Drouot. I mean, organization really came to claim that these masks are holy object. The second, so when you have a demand, I think this is really very much something that we can discuss. But there is one thing that is impossible to discuss, is the restitution of objects which use human left bones and skulls. And as long as there is a Papua New Guinea, for instance, who asks for a fetish which is in Dahlem, I'm just taking an example. We can't deny this. Especially because Papua New Guinea was discovered very lately. And if some group claim that this is our ancestors, we have to send it back.
Do we have to send the stuff back? I mean, I'm asking this for you to help the new German director of the British Museum, Hartwig Fischer. Do we have to send the stuff back to Greece because Amal Clooney and Alexis Tsipras are asking for it? And the whole population of Greece is saying, giving it back?
I mean,
she's very beautiful, Amal Clooney.
Yeah. The thing is that I can understand, especially now, why Greece is asking for that. I think there is a difference, again, between this... we have also an example here in Berlin. It's the Nefertiti. Yeah. I have to say that I'm not against... I'm not in this repatriation of Nefertiti, but I'm a bit annoyed each time I go to the subway here and I see these advertisements, which are super kitsch, mixing this disco ball with the head of Nefertiti. And I have to say that even if I'm not Egyptian, I'm offended.
Good to know.
No,
Simon.
As for the Greek, it's very simple. I mean, after all the hard time the Europeans have been giving them, they want to take revenge. So Tsipras, they cut his balls. But why not? I mean, I have no things against. I cannot say that in Papua Guinea or in Cameroon or in Latin America it has to be given back, and say no for the Greek.
Last question to all of you. Is there a future for the Ethnological Museum instead of closing them down like the Tropenmuseum in Amsterdam, instead of giving the directors who try to be experimental a hardship is there a future for the Ethnological Museum? Claudia?
I would definitely say yes, and I think that's the most exciting challenge talking about museums. So, yeah.
Why is it the most exciting challenge?
Yeah, because you have to think about new orders, new structures. You have to overcome the long history of colonial history, and with all the results we now see in the museums, with this notion of otherness, so with all these philosophical things. And I think it's time to start something new. And of course it's not easy, but I think it's very thrilling. So, yeah.
Simon?
Well, I think they should be shut down. Not totally. They should be transformed into warehouses, like big entrepôts, where people can come, somebody who wants to make research, etc.
And take them with them.
Not take them with them, but go and study them, etc., but without any logos that would come from outside. Just a warehouse. You come, you take a rendezvous, you checked when you enter, you checked when you go out, but then you have your own dialogue with the object without anyone imposing it on you, because those objects, again, are charged. No matter how we try to turn them, we will be always aside the meaning, no matter what the meaning is. So let them leave, and it would save money.
So that means, but to
just
take your proposal seriously,
Yes,
that means
I'm
to create a
taking
kind
it
of Schaulager, to create a kind of reorganizing of the museum, also rethinking what the curatorial role is, and really consider probably these museums as libraries?
Absolutely. I said warehouse because they're objects, but
Right.
libraries. And we get rid of curators, etc. We put librarian and
With Kader Attia as the chief
chief
artist of the archive. Kader, seriously, is there a future for the Ethnological Museum?
I mean, I don't want to disappoint you, but frankly, I think that the Museum of Ethnology is based on a big misunderstanding. And since the beginning, it has been built on colonialism. And as long as we will have objects which are part of this invention of the othernesses, we will be misunderstanding what are the others. When you see an African mask in Quai Branly, for instance, or in Dahlem, it's not anymore an African mask. First, it's incomplete. You have only 10% of the object. But most of the time, as you said before, Chris, they are diaspora. They are the trace of something, but now they are part of something else. And the problem is not, I would say, this museography in which they are organized, which claim pretentiously to be that, no, what you see is an African mask, is a Dogon mask. It's not a Dogon mask, it's a dead object.
So there is no future for the Ethnological Museum?
I think absolutely, Chris. I think there's no future. I think one day we will wake up and think, this is a nonsense. We have to reinvent. We have to remove the border between those objects and these things that I don't know, which would work very well with them.
So where do we put then these objects? In a library, in a storage? We give them back? Where do we do then? What do we do?
We give them back to life. You know a lot about theater. We play probably performance with these masks. I'm always dreaming of watching these masks performed, not by people of the past, that would be exotic, but by people today, interpreting their own emotion with these objects. My frustration is that these objects are like exhibited as dead objects. Remember the movie of Chris Macker and Alain René?
Les Statues Meurent aussi of 1959, where he made these masks come to life again through the intervention of the camera and the voice. Is that a way to approach it?
It is a way, but I will never forget this beginning and the sentence, which says when men die, they go to history. When object, sculpture die, they go to museum.
That's, I think, a very
Chris,
beautiful end. But Simon wants to give us an epilogue.
No,
Yes.
it's not an accident if the Chris Marker film was commissioned by Présence Africaine.
That's good.